morning and welcome to the webinar. I'm Adele Krach and I'm from Food Focus, and it's a pleasure to host yet another amazing informative webinar with the Dairy Standard Agency. This is the third session for this year. If you've missed the previous two sessions, the first one was on the Dairy Standard Agency and their services, and the second one was on biosecurity, you can have a look at these webinars if you go to our website www.foodfocus.co.za, and at the top of the homepage you will see there's a bar that says resources, and if you hover with your mouse over resources, it brings a drop down that says webinars, and those webinars are posted there, so you are welcome to go and have a look at them. Jacqueline, to you and your team, thank you so much for these amazing webinars that you are organizing and talking about topics that we all have questions about, and for the value that you're adding to the industry. Today, we will be speaking about the prudent use of antimicrobials, and will focus on the use of antibiotics. Antibiotics have revolutionized the world of medicine, both for human and for animal health. It plays a critical role in keeping livestock healthy and productive. There are benefits in using antibiotics, but it needs to happen with great caution. If we don't use it with caution, it causes violative residues in edible animal products and can cause severe allergic reactions in antibiotic-sensitive humans. It can contribute to the development of resistance, and it will interfere with product manufacturing. We have a combined responsibility to be committed in preserving the value and correct use of these products. To provide us with more information on this topic, we are very glad today to present to you our speaker and our presenter, Dr. Chris van Dyk. Chris, welcome, and we are so looking forward to your presentation. I would like just to give you a little bit on his career and where he comes from. So Chris has been working within the private practice and public and in corporate spheres for almost 40 years. Beginning his career as a veterinarian and later as a veterinary specialist in a veterinary practice. From 2000, he moved into the corporate arena with one of the leading animal health companies in the world, serving South and Central Africa. In 2015, Chris joined the Milk Producers Organization, a non-profit organization in South Africa, and he's the executive head. His role at the MPO includes engaging with stakeholders at prominent levels, driving the identification of value-adding products and services, and research development to the sector. In 2021, he embarked on a new venture as a specialist veterinary consultant, and he's consulting to the FAO, pharmaceutical companies, South Africa Veterinary Association, and various other groups. Chris, it is a pleasure to have you today, and we are really looking forward to your presentation, and I'm sure of it, we're going to have loads of questions, and please enjoy your presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you, and good morning to everybody. Adele, just to confirm, you can see my screen and you can hear me?
Absolutely, Chris. You can go ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, I want to say colleagues or ladies and gentlemen or friends, you know, good morning, and Adele, thank you, and also to Dairy Standards. Again, thank you for the invitation. It's indeed a privilege to share with you, you know, this little part of veterinary science with you. You know, we've done 2 years, I think, of pharmacology at pre-graduate level, but there's such a lot of things happening. You know, we've got hormones, we've got antibiotics, we've got anti-helminthics, we've got anti-protozoal products. All of those products will go into the animal, but eventually it also needs to get out of the animal. You know, so it's metabolized in the animal, either via the liver or then via the kidneys, excreted via the kidneys and the urine eventually. And then also in the milk. So what I'm going to do today is then, you know, give you an overview. Let me just find out how this thing works. Okay, I'm with you. Okay, so as an introduction, what I'm, you know, I'll give you a short introduction. like a good sermon on a Sunday, there's only 3 points here, but it will take us about 45 minutes, to get through this presentation. So yes, as Adele said, please, I would like to answer some questions if there's time at the end. This is always a very controversial issue, because the milk buyer will phone the farmer and say there's antibiotics in your milk. So what do you do then? Where do you start, and what's the reason for that? Unfortunately, it can happen. So I'm going to give you a short introduction, then talk about the management. You will see a lot of these things actually is what I call pre-farm guide, so within the environment of the farm itself. Some of these things will happen out of the farm gate, but eventually, from farm to fridge, in other words, from the cow, eventually to where the milk or the cheese ends up in your fridge. We would like to have a good quality, wholesome product there, without any inhibitory substances, without any antibiotics or anything. And I can always almost want to say, I can promise you, with what we've got in place, with what Dairy Standards is doing, and all the checks and balances we've got in place, you can be 100% sure, the milk and the cheese and all the dairy products that you buy will be free from any inhibitory substances, and especially free from antibiotics. So if we go to the first slide here, part of the introduction, there's a lot of writing here, and I'm not going to read all of that. I've specifically done it, this presentation is recorded, and it will also be available in a PDF format later on. Then you can go and read it. But I think in the past, and I want to call it almost in the past, we typically focus on preventing drug residues in milk and meat produced by the farm. But I think it's crucial to recognize that to maintain food supply and safe food supply, the important word there is safe food supply. It's not only important. It's not the only important aspect of antibiotic stewardship or the prudent use of antibiotics. We need to look at, as part of this whole stewardship, we need to start looking at preventing the development and the spread of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. That's a huge issue. If on the antimicrobial task team of a ministerial task team of antimicrobial resistance, and then also residues and of specifically chemical residues in milk and meat and so on. And we're talking on this, this specific topic on a daily basis, interacting with different people from the medicine world, medical doctors, and all the other people that can play an important role here. So, the last bullet there, I think the importance of residue prevention in animal agriculture is there, but we need to embrace the concept of antibiotic stewardship to prevent antibiotic resistance as well. So that's a very, very important issue. Now, if you look at, and I think that's maybe the key word or the key sentence for this today's presentation: antibiotics, a valuable tool, and then a moment of silence, but then an awesome responsibility. So we've got an awesome responsibility. It's veterinarians, the farmers, the farm workers, they all do have an awesome responsibility to make sure, that we don't get any antibiotics in the food, specifically in milk and milk or dairy products, but then also in the meat. So as Adele said, antibiotics revolutionized the whole world, the world of medicine, both for human and animal health. If you look at, the development, and, I've been practicing almost 40 years now as a veterinarian, and what we had in the early 80s and what we do have as antibiotics now, is a completely different world. But also very, very important, we've got this highly technical developed medicine. We've got it in our toolkit, and we can use it if we do want to use it. But I think it's also very important, to maintain the high health status of today's efficient cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats. I've excluded there, and don't forget about them. Poultry, also very important as part of the protein supply. They all play a very, very critical role in food security and food, specifically in food security. But it's very, very important that we keep these animals healthy and that we keep them productive. So like in the bottom little block there, like all useful management tools, antibiotics should be used together with good management practices. You can't just think you're going to doctor everything out of a bottle, or out of a tube and say this is going to save the day. We need to look at management. If you look at any disease, we've got always the triangle is the host factors, the environmental factors, and the pathogens. But in the middle, I always, and that's the basis of epidemiology. But in the middle of that, I usually put the M, and that's a large M there for management. We need to have management in place, and I'm going to focus on that in a few slides from now. So correct diagnosis, a clean environment, sound nutrition, livestock comfort, livestock welfare, all of those things come into play here. And it's important, that we look at this. And then the lack of attention to good husbandry. What our fathers and our grandfathers teach us about good husbandry, we still need to do that. So a happy animal is a healthy animal, and we need to look at the welfare of those animals to make sure, that we don't have a problem there. Now, if you look at the development of antibiotics, there's for every 20,000 discovered chemicals, and they don't discover many more new chemicals every day. 20, 40, 50, 100 years ago, we discovered many chemicals. But out of every 20,000 chemicals, we must also look at that. And that's why it's so expensive, to bring a new antimicrobial product onto the market. Only one of those, that 20,000, will go through the whole trial period, from the initial discovery in lab, and then eventually, to put it into animals, and then eventually also into the humans. So that's why it's so expensive, and why we need to look at what we've got to make sure that we don't overuse what we've got, and that we still do have antibiotics in future. As I said earlier, antibiotics is not the only solution. We need to look at healthy animals. Healthy animals, as I said, produce healthy, safe, and affordable food. If you just look at some of the zoonotic organisms there, zoonosis is an bacteria or a virus that can be transmitted from animals to humans. We've seen it now with COVID-19. Apparently it's coming from bats. So that's a zoonotic disease. We're also looking at Rift Valley fever as an example. On the slide there, I've got E. coli, I've got Campylobacter, I've got Salmonella. We don't want that in the food chain. So that's why it's so important, at farm level, to make sure that we don't get it into the food chain, to prevent it eventually getting into humans. So healthy animals will ensure the efficiency and then also the productivity of food producing animals. And then also important at the end stage, unfortunately, all our animals, even dairy cows, when they, at the end of their career, they will go to the abattoir, but we can reduce it. The average age in South Africa, if you look at the Netherlands, the average age of a cow, or the average lactation is about 6 to 8 lactations. In South Africa, we're sitting at 2.7 lactations. So we've got a long way to get to the level where the people from the Netherlands, as an example, are, to reduce the culling itself. And then the losses, there's a lot of, if you start looking at money is always, will come into play with this. And we're looking at tangible losses. You can read it yourself there. To refuse a tanker of 30,000 liters of milk, because your milk will be collected together with some other farmers, and it will be mixed in a tanker. But then if they pick up an antibiotic there, it will be the whole tanker. So these days at about 6 Rand, 6.50 a liter, you can calculate for yourself, what's going to be the tangible loss there. Condemnation of carcasses, higher production costs, test costs, regulatory actions, and then the non-tangible losses. There's low efficacy, reduced development of new products, and then very, very important, at the end of this whole value chain is the end user or the customer. If we do have antibiotics in the milk, we will lose trust, or they will lose trust in the product, and eventually stop drinking the milk and using a high quality product. Okay, if I can quickly take you, this took me, I think, most of the time at Honest to Port, the 5.5 years that I had to spend there. Organisms. We get bacteria, we get viruses. Today we're going to focus on bacteria. Just the definition there, I see them as the enemy. We get gram-positive bacteria, and then we get gram-negative bacteria. That's the way the bacteria actually will stain, because of there's a difference in the cell wall of the bacteria. On the left-hand side, you can see the gram-positive bacteria. If you thought COVID makes a nice picture of all those little spikes. On the left-hand side, we've got Staph aureus, and then on the right-hand side is a picture of E. coli. So yeah, one can't say it's beautiful, but yes, that's what we do have. So on the left-hand side, most of the bacteria that you will find on a dairy or in the dairy industry, we know about what happened now recently with Listeria and the Polony. Listeria can also come through the health system. It can get into the milk and eventually end up in the milk. So that's all the things that we need to check for. I think important ones also at the bottom there, Pasteurella and Salmonella. And then the gram-negative bacteria would be E. coli, Klebsiella, and Salmonella. Some of them can be, they can be gram-positive, gram-negative, depending on the different species. And then the antibiotic families. If you look at the classification, at the bottom left, we've got a tetracycline. The tetra is the 4 rings that you can see there. Tetracycline, all of the tetracyclines will look like that, with a difference maybe on carbon 25. There would be a double oxygen or double CH3 or something like that, compared to the next tetracycline. So there's a small little difference, but all of them will have the same picture. And then on the right-hand side is depicting the beta-lactams or your penicillins. All of them look like that. If you look at the chemical structure, with maybe you can see there's a double oxygen there on that carbon binding there. That could be the reason why we do have the specific beta-lactam. Okay, so that's the one way that we classify. This is as a background. I think we need to understand this. And then what we also do get is then another, I said that we do have gram-positive, gram-negative bacteria. We can have the different chemical structures, but then we can also distinguish between bacteriostatic and bactericidal. Bacteriostatic antibiotics will be, this is as the solution, to counter the bacteria that will inhibit the growth of the bacterial organism. And I'll show you in the next slide, actually, what they will do. And then, on the right-hand side, bactericidal, that will kill the bacteria and that will immediately stop the disease progression. So sometimes, especially with your bacteriostatic products, we will inhibit the growth there, and then the animal or the person's own immune system can then overcome this, own defenses, as I said, they then can overcome this problem there and kill the bacteria eventually. So yes, on the left-hand side, bacteriostatic would be your tetracyclines, your macrolides, some of your sulfas, your amphenicals, and then on the right-hand side, your bactericidal would be your beta-lactams, penicillins, cephalosporins, aminoglycosides, and some of the sulfas. If you look at the next slide, this is again, the antibiotic mechanism of action, and I'm not going to go into detail there, but you can see that 9 o'clock. Inhibition of the folic acid itself, inhibition there at 12 o'clock, inhibition of the bacterial cell wall, inhibition of the bacterial protein on the right-hand side, and then the nucleic acid there. Now the antibiotics, all the antibiotics are listed there, but you can see, as an example, the ones with the red circles around, those are the antibiotics that you do find in the veterinary environment and products that we do use in animals. But also the thing is, we also use these antibiotics in humans. So the thing is that we don't want to create a resistance or antimicrobial resistance in the veterinary environment and then transmit it over back to the human environment. It can also happen vice versa, that they can develop a resistance in a human bacteria, but by the overuse of a certain antibiotic by medical doctors, and then eventually it can, that can be transmitted back to the animals, and then we do have a problem. Another thing, important thing that I would like to share with you is on One Health. One Health, important, you can see there at about 10 o'clock on the diagram there. It's about 10 o'clock, antibiotics and other antimicrobials. Now, One Health is this approach, we're working together with veterinary, it's veterinarians, and then also your medical doctors and all the other different ranges of people that you can get as involved in this, that will interact and start working on this to look at and what we're busy doing in the whole One Health project is to look at the interconnectedness of the health of people, the health of animals, and then the effect on the environment. So in the end, if you look at antimicrobial use in animals, people, and the environment, all contribute to the emergence of resistance. And this is this resistance that we would like to prevent the spread of that. So that's, that's pharmacology. It took me 3 or 4 years, to get through that at Honest Report. That's pharmacology, a quick and also a quick overview of bacteriology. So we've got the different antibiotics, we've got the different organisms that we need to treat, and what are we going to do to make sure that we don't overtreat this and that we don't get a lot of these organisms into the system and eventually transfer or transmit it to humans, and then sit with a problem there. Now, if you look at management itself, management, I've got a 10-point plan here, and I won't take all of your time this morning. I think we all do have other things to do, but I think it's very, very important to share this with you this morning. If you look at the 10 points there, most of them will be pre-farm gate. Some of them, the test for the residues, number 8 there, number 8, and then the involvement of the role players, that's all outside of the farm gate, but we can also test within the farm gate for some of the residues there. But if you look at herd health itself, herd health has been a concept when I started in early 80s. When I qualified, herd health was something new to everybody. Those of you that did read the books of James Herriot, maybe, James Herriot was looking at the one individual animal. He did go out to one cow, like in South Africa, we will have cows with names in the old days. Now we're milking some of the dairies, the macro dairies in the Tsitsikamma as an example, milking 10 or 12,000 cows in one dairy or in one herd. So herd health, a very, very important concept. Now, if you look at herd health itself, and I'm not going to discuss this again in detail, but if you can see the colors there, it's a light blue color. Now, the light blue color is reproduction there, and I don't know what color is this, maybe make it orange-pink, feeding and nutrition. That's what we focused on in the past. So veterinarians would have been involved in reproduction, pregnancy diagnosis, and that was basically what they've been doing 20, 30 years ago. Now what we've done, and our involvement is much more complicated and much more involved. We're looking at animal care, we're looking at biosecurity. We want to produce safe food, and we want to protect the environment. Again, touching on the whole aspect of One Health. But you can see there, the important things that we're busy doing now these days. This is really herd health. So there's a lot of things happening there. Important, during all of this, antibiotics and antibiotic stewardship and the prudent use of antibiotics and vaccines and so on. Very, very important that we will address that. And then again, making sure, if you look at just manure and water management as an example, at the bottom there at about, 7 o'clock. The labor, the training of the people at farm level, facilities and equipment. On the right-hand side there at 3 o'clock, calves and heifers, grazing, the health, culling, all of those things need to come into play when we start looking at herd health. So yeah, for herd health, what we do have these days, and it's not, I can't, it's maybe not legible to everybody on your screens, but this is basically the standard operating procedure, to achieve milk quality and profit. So you're starting at the left top there. You can see there the pre-milking procedure, then the force stripping, teat sanitation, attachment, the end of milking, and what you need to do. So these are all the steps that the steps that you need to put in place. If you look at force stripping at the bottom left as an example, there a cow will be coming into the parlor. She will be tested with a little strip cup. Importance of that is to look for any possibility of clinical mastitis. At this stage, we can't check for any antibiotics, but we need to check, the cow will be marked, and I'll show you later on how you can actually mark a cow with antibiotics to make sure that you don't milk a cow, that has got antibiotics. Usually the best thing would be to milk that cow last, as the last team, and then that milk will not go into the bulk tank. So this is the whole process, that will be followed as a standard operating procedure. Then we also got processes, again, this is for mastitis or intramammary infection. We can't always go and send the milk to a laboratory like what the lady is doing on the left-hand side there, to have it tested there, to have it analyzed and so on. So many of these things will happen at farm level. So first of all, I think very important is to have the previous history at that hand. You need to look at the available antibiotics. You need to look at your treatment success with the previous products. And then you need to decide, whether you are going to put this intramammary, via the teat itself, or are you going to inject this? There's certain antibiotics that will end up in the milk, and that's where you would like to have it, but then you need to have a withdrawal period. So this is, again, this is available. Whoever would like to have more detail and more legible type of documents, I can send it to you. I think I will share my email with you at the end of the presentation. Okay, so that's the herd health itself. A quick overview of herd health. The next one would be a veterinarian-client-patient relationship. This is very, very important. There should be a veterinarian involved in any dairy. All dairies should have a veterinarian on board, and I think all beef herds also should have a veterinarian on board. The use of medicine, and we'll get to the prescription of medicine, it requires the relationship where the veterinarian is involved in all aspects of herd health. This is a photo of one of my colleagues that I took many years ago in Australia. He's busy treating a cow there with milk fever. You can see at the bottom left why you can say it's milk fever. You can just see the legs of the little calf there on the left-hand side there. But okay, what product are you going to put into this cow? If you put in calcium is not a problem. But if you put in, say, sometimes we inject a cow like this with cortisone, or even with an antibiotic if there's some infection. So it becomes an issue, and it becomes residues in the milk. So we need to have a veterinarian on board. A veterinarian, you can't have a dairy farm with an uncle or a brother or somebody sitting in the UK and practicing there as a vet and doing a prescription for somebody milking cows in the Tsitsikamma area, as an example. It's illegal, and it's basically against the law, and it's not compliant. Okay, that's on veterinarian. So you do need to have, sometimes we just talk about the VCP, veterinarian client-patient relationship. You should have that. Then when you get to products, all products that you use in animals should be registered. We've got two types of product in South Africa. We've got the over-the-counter, the OTC products, that's under Act 36 of 1947. And then we've got the POM, or the prescription only, or the vet only products. That's your schedule products. Schedule 3, 4, 5, and 6. Most of your antibiotics will be Schedule 4 under Act 101 of 1965. So the best is to use a registered product, and it's illegal to use an unregistered product. We do get some home mixing and a lot of things that's happening back there. I will make my own dip. I will make my own this and my own that. We don't know what is the safety of that product. We don't know what's the efficacy of that product. And it's against the law. And then, we do get generics. There's very good generics on the market. There's unfortunately some of the not so good generics on the market, but I think most of the generics on the market can be used safely. It can be used. We do have the efficacy, we do have the safety data, and also the withdrawal periods of these products will be on the label there. I'll get to labeling just now. And then extra label usage. It's extra label usage from time to time. It will be required to use that product because it's not available in the country. You've done an antibiogram as an example, and now you see that we do need an antibiotic that's completely out of the range. Then the veterinarian can go and use a human product, but that immediately that product becomes the milk cannot be used because we don't know what's the withdrawal period. But only a veterinarian can make that call on whether we would like to use a product extra labelly or extra label. That's not on the package insert itself. Okay, so poor quality products, maybe you've read it already. So we don't want to use poor quality products because eventually, for the purpose of this talk, we don't want residues in the milk and the meat, and we don't want food and feed contamination. Then point number 4, if you get to labeling, as I said, there's a lot of writing on these slides. I'm just going to touch on it, but we've got the Act 36 product. You can walk into a co-op, you can go walk into any shop dispensing these medicine, but on that product should be the label of the manufacturer. If they give you a bottle that's without a label, that's illegal. The indication must be there whether it can be used in lactating cows. If the indication is there, or if there's no indication of the withdrawal period in milk, then you must, the answer is you cannot use this product in a lactating cow. Usually there will be a withdrawal period for meat, but nothing for milk. Then you can't use that because there's no withdrawal period for that. Then the same for Act 101 products. It must be prescribed by the veterinarian. The veterinarian's label must be on that bottle. The lactating cows must clearly identify what's the withdrawal period. And it should not be on the form without that basic information. And then on the right-hand side would be, if it's an extra label product, the veterinarian that compounded this product, the veterinarian's name and his address must be there. You must specify the actives, but you must also specify the milk withdrawal. If it's extra label usage, you cannot use the product in a dairy cow, or you cannot use the milk, for a certain period. Get a veterinarian, he must be able to tell you what's the withdrawal period. If he can't tell you what's the withdrawal period, I think rather look at another product. Then point number 5, the storage of products. I think the storage of products, you can see some of the photos. I took these photos in, I think, in New Zealand. The top left photo there, it's a mixture of, you can see there's doramectin, there's antibiotics, there's a cup of coffee also somewhere of one of the photos. These it shouldn't look like that. And then also when you store antibiotics and vaccines, the fridge shouldn't look like the fridge on the right-hand side. So it must be properly stored. Certain vaccines should not be freezed. You can't, it should be at the bottom here, but you can see what's happening with the freezer there. And also antibiotics. You can't freeze certain antibiotics. I think you will get away. You will have an effect on the actives of the antibiotic itself, and then eventually it will have an effect on the efficacy of the product. And then the difference between the different, there's two shelves there, with one with a dry cow remedy and then one for a lactating cow remedy. Unfortunately, some of the people on farms can't read. They will look at the picture and they will use the same product, or the incorrect product for, as an example, we'll use a dry cow product for a lactating cow. So what I suggested to this person, just put some things there, tape or something, and paint it red and say, okay, the red, you're not allowed to touch whatever's on the red shelf there, to make sure that we don't get any antibiotics or antimicrobial residues into the milk itself. Then if you look at administration, I think it's important to look at, which product can be used in specific animals. Certain products only registered to be used in dogs and cats. You're not allowed to use it in food-producing animals. If you look at phenylbutazone as an example, you're not allowed to use phenylbutazone anymore in lactating or in food-producing animals, because eventually what will happen, that's why we had so many mortalities in vultures, because the vultures eventually got to the meat and they actually got affected by the phenylbutazone in the meat itself. Chloramphenicol, as an example, you get it in eye drops and different other products in the human medicine. You also still do get it in dogs and cats, so you can use it in dogs and cats, but we're not allowed to use it in food-producing animals because of the possible effect that it can eventually have on your bone marrow and eventually even lead to cancer in humans if you ingest that. The dosage, the route, and then you can see almost every slide I've got the withdrawal period. And then if you double the dose for some reason, the veterinarian recommend another route of administration, intravenous instead of intramuscular, the interval between the products, then it becomes extra label, and then you need to treat it as an extra label treatment, and then you need to adhere to the withdrawal periods that will be written on the bottle itself, by the veterinarian. If you look at the records and record keeping, this is so important. There in the right top you can see antibiotics. Cow number 8 has got antibiotics. Sometimes we mark it, with a leg band or something like that. This is very good because you can immediately see when they're coming into the parlor that this cow has got antibiotics and she should not be milked in this steam. We've got different systems these days. There's also electronic systems like Aficum and Delaval systems that we do have, where a cow will, the milk machine will just not start if there's antibiotics in this cow. So it's important to look at that. So records and record keeping, very, very important. Then we get to a very controversial thing, the test for residues. Now, when do you test? Again, there's a flow diagram with the milk truck arriving there at the top left. What do? Immediately when that milk truck, before they start pumping the milk from the bulk tank, the driver of that truck will actually take a sample of that milk, and he will put it into his cool bag in the truck. When they arrive back at the factory or at the plant, they will, before they start pumping this milk into the factory, they will test this milk. And that's so important. You must make sure that you don't get any antibiotic or any residues into your milk, because that can eventually lead to a lot of problems. A good thing would be, to take a double sample there. If you do get a phone call from the milk buyer that there's a problem, I think it's important, that you do have a second sample that you can send to a second laboratory. Now, there's a laboratory in Pretoria, that can not only look at we need to look at the quantity. We need to say, okay, there's antibiotics, there's a tetracycline, there's a beta-lactam, there's a macrolide, or whatever is in there, and then we need to break it down into the different parent molecules, the metabolites, to eventually tell you, what's the quantity of this antibiotic. Unfortunately, sometimes, and I'll get to the sensitivity of the test, the Delvo test and the charm test and the twin and the tri-sensor test. Those tests are very, very sensitive, but sometimes for certain antibiotics, they're oversensitive, and we do get false positive results sometimes, from the laboratory. If you look at the maximum residue level, the withdrawal period is determined in healthy animals. So one must also realize, if a cow's got mastitis, the membranes are opening up. Certain antibiotics, if a cow is not sick, that antibiotics will not end up in the milk. But if there's a lot of damage to the other tissue itself, especially if you gram-negative organisms like your E. coli and so on, we will get necrosis of certain areas in the teeth, and then the antibiotics can end up in the teeth or in the milk itself. Important again, animals treated extra labelly, animals treated in the dry period. Certain products you can use it in a dry period, but they will have a long residual activity, sometimes up to 7 weeks. So if you're not 100% sure about when this cow is going to cough, and she will not have at least an 8-week dry period, don't use that product in a dry cow, because you will have antibiotic in the milk, and you can milk her as many times as you want to. That will end up in the milk, and you will be fined, and your milk will be refused at the plant itself. So testing for the residues, unfortunately, this is now getting to I think there's some of the people online this morning working there with the milk at, receiving it at the laboratory, at the plant, or at the plant itself, or at the factory. And then we get false positives. Now, I think one of the reasons could be an incorrect lab method. I've been involved in 1 or 2 cases, where the lab method is not. Again, go back to your SOP, get a proper SOP in place, and make sure that you use this product 100% correctly. Otherwise, it's going to end up in a court case. And I've been in some of those court cases. You don't want to be told by the judge you didn't do what you had to do, and now we're sitting with this problem. And then the contamination, sometimes environmental contamination, soaps, or the hands of the operator. Unfortunately, some of the people even on farms are using penicillins. You could have some flu or whatever. You're drinking your penicillin tablets and then working with the milk. But those tests are so sensitive, they can pick up a small little bit of antibiotic on your hand. They can eventually pick it up, and it can be demonstrated in the milk itself. Then the on-farm tests, most of the on-farm tests that we do have in South Africa and even worldwide that's been approved by the FDA is not suitable for individual animals. Individual animals completely different, completely different way. The tests are all validated to be used on bulk tanks. And then also a very important thing is to look at the expiry date of the reagents. And please, if it tells you it needs to be in the fridge, take it out, quickly use the reagents and put it back in the fridge. Don't put it on the windowsill there. I left it standing in the sun, because then it will give you false positives. So yes, we do get some problems associated with milk. The charm and the Delvo test, The results may vary with varying SECs, the somatic cell counts. If you do have, as an example, in the Tsitsikamma or in the pasture-based areas, a lot of cows will cough. A lot of cows, in the beginning, there will be high levels of lactoferrins early in the lactation, and that can give you false positives. And then sometimes, we've seen it with the milk fat, the cows with the higher milk fat, like your Jerseys and your Ayrshires and your Guernseys, as an example, that can also influence the test results. And then the sampling method. Important, if you take the full milk, that first streak of milk that comes out, that will give you higher false positives compared to a second milk that you will get out there. And then associated with the operation of the test, I've already said it there, excessive milk, reagents, incubation times, all these things are actually defined under the Feedstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectant Act 54 of 1972. The maximum residue levels are defined there. I just want to take a minute or two on this slide, if you allow me. This is an example of safety for, the different levels that you get. So if you look at the concentration, it's micrograms per milliliter on the left hand or on the y-axis there, and then the time here. Usually after injection, if you inject Ceftiofur as an example, it will go up. It will go what we call to the maximum level there, the maximum concentration. Then it will start breaking down, and about 24 hours later, it will be at the level where you need to give the next injection there. So the next injection then from 24 hours, and then it will give you the same curve there. But now the problem is that what we do have, and you can see the difference there, what I said earlier, this product that's in green there, it's a product with a long-acting carrier, and that gives you a completely different area under the curve and the breakdown and all the things that you see on this nice pharmacology curve. So you can't compare and say, okay, it contains Ceftiofur as an example, and it's exactly the same pharmaceutical compound, but it's a different composition. So don't decide on your own, I'm going to do it like this or that or that. There's a lot of science behind it, and you can see as an example, what's the difference here that you do get. But then certain organisms, most of the organisms that we do fight, your Staph aureus, Strep agalactia, Strep uberis, E. coli, and those organisms, the MIC, the minimum inhibitory concentration, would be between 0.2 and 3, micrograms per milliliter. So that's what we need. So the antibiotic, although it's going above that level there, it will be enough in the body of the animal, to counter this microbe. As soon as it comes under this level of 0.2, that's where you can start getting resistance, and that's where the antibiotic is not effective anymore. But now, if you look at some of your tests, okay, just to get this one here, Ceftiofur as an example, according to Act 54 of 1972, the maximum residue level of Ceftiofur is 100 micrograms per milliliter. Now, if you look at some of the tests that's available, there's the Trisensor test as an example at 8 microgram, the Charm test at 10 microgram, the Delvo test at 70 micrograms. So if you're using a Delvo test, it can, even if there's antibiotic in this milk, up to 70 micrograms, it can test positive. But this is a false positive because the maximum residue level is 100 micrograms. So we need to make sure about, if you do get a positive, what is the reason for that? And that's, why you need to read as they always say, step 1 is sit down and step 2 is read the instructions. These are the beta-lactams, the sulfas and the tetracyclines. That's the cutoff levels for the different antibiotics in the different products out there. Okay, the number 9 is then the involvement of all role players. I think first of all, we started the dairy farm. I've got 0.8 to 10, 1 to 10 here this morning. 1 to 7 is almost at farm level. But the milk buyers that's in the meeting today, this is the message that you need to take back to farm level. And then I'm available, if you want me to give this training to your different milk producers, because unfortunately there's not many dairy farmers in this meeting this morning, but this is what they need to do. So they're the custodians of this. They need to make sure that we don't get any antibiotics into the silos there in the left bottom. We've got tests like this, the SNAP test that's available. Very important, we need to train the employees you know, to read drugs in prescription, and also to the interpretation of that, very, very important. And then the last point, point number 10, would be to, you know, to evaluate on a yearly basis. Now, Dairy Standard Agency, Jompie Burger, together with his team, they've got this, put this book together. I've just summarized some of the different chapters in this book. You know, so this book is available through Dairy Standards, but there you can look at the structural requirements. You can look at the practices, the health and disease management, animal welfare, biosecurity, hygiene practices, documentation and standards, and then dairy exports. And then the last thing that what Dairy Standards also do, they will do a yearly auditing. In this yearly auditing, they will look at the prudent, if you're a real steward of using antibiotics correctly, if you're using it prudently. Also, they will look at biosecurity. They will also look at the welfare of the animals. So I think it's important, you know, to get this book immediately. It should be on your left-hand side, on your desk, you know, accessible, and you should read it on a daily basis. So, Chairman, to conclude, I think this is my last slide. All role players, you know, individually and as an industry. So everybody sitting around in this meeting today, and every individual farmer, individual laboratory technician, individual person out working there in the dairy industry, we need to work together. We need to collaborate to preserve the effectiveness and availability of antimicrobial drugs. As I said, you know, there's not many new drugs. There's a lot of generics coming onto the market, yes, but new drugs, we're not getting new drugs, and we can run into a position where nothing is going to work anymore, and then we will have a problem. So the core principles that I've summarized there, I think we need to commit to the principles of prudent use of antimicrobials. We need to advocate this. We need to select and use antimicrobial drugs judiciously, evaluate antimicrobial drug uses practices itself. We need to educate and build expertise. So this is why it's so good to have this meeting this morning, to make sure, you know, that we educate everybody and that we're all aware of what we need to do. And then we need to implement one or more principles to improve disease prevention strategies. Again, you know, healthy animals are happy animals. If an animal is healthy, then we don't need to have an antibiotic. So yes, go and revisit your vaccination strategies, immunization strategies that can prevent disease, and then we don't need an antibiotic. So, Chairman, yeah, or Adele, thank you. That's from my side. It's good to share this with you, and a quick 50 minutes went past, so it's back to you, Adele.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much for that very informative presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now your opportunity to ask questions, and at the moment there's no questions currently, but Chris, I definitely have a question for you. And what I want to know is, you know, you've shared a very practical 10-point plan in terms of to prevent the inhibitory substances in milk. But I'm sure of it from the buyers that's online at the moment, they probably often have to call the farmers and say to the farmers that, you know, they found inhibitory substances in the milk. What is the reason? Why do you think this is still happening?
Yeah, Adele, it's, you know, we also, you know, when we go to church on Sundays, they tell us we need to behave and do what we need to do. And on Monday, we start doing something else. And this is the same, you know, we can be preaching and preaching and preaching and all the time tell the people, you know, this is important. But I think most of the mistakes actually, or unfortunately, happen at farm level. You know, so what will happen is maybe, you know, the recording or the marking of the animals, you know, cows that's marked as treated, they will jump the fence and get into the camp together with the milking cows, and then their milk will go into the bulk tank. I think not adhering to the, and that's why it's so important to look at compliance. You know, the incorrect withdrawal periods. If it tells you the withdrawal period is 72 hours, 71 hours is not good enough. I'd rather go for 73 hours than go for 71 hours. Because you can pick up antibiotics. You know, these tests, again, that's why it's such a good thing. These tests are so sensitive that they will pick it up at very, very low levels. And then sometimes there's a complete ignorance of residues. You know, people will say, no, but they will not pick it up in milk. We've now recently, together with Dairy Standards, we've been doing some work where we looked at, I think it was 120 metabolites of different products, you know, and we did pick up some of these metabolites, although at very low levels, but that should not be in milk. You know, so we need to be ignorant of this is I think it's a crime. You know, a crime against humanity, and again a crime against our good quality product to say nobody will pick it up. You know, some way they're going to pick it up, and there's more tests that they're busy developing. At this stage, they're testing for beta-lactams, tetracyclines, and your sulfas, but they're going to develop, and it's already in the pipeline, to look at many more other metabolites of different products. I also mentioned about the dry cows. You know, if a dry cow calves too early, then it can happen there. And then there's, you know, the ignorance, and some people will say it's not me. You know, it wasn't me. And then sometimes it could be a lab problem. But for the labs, most of the problems, fortunately, would be on the side of the farmer. You know, but it's unfortunate that we do have that problem. You know, that people are still ignorant, and we need to make sure, you know, that we don't end up with antibiotic. But fortunately, the labs will pick it up, and then they will prevent, you know, this going into a good quality cheese or yogurt or whatever.
Yes, yeah, and I think something else that you also mentioned, you know, for the world that we currently live in, we as humans, these days, if you become sick, the first doctor you go to is Dr. Google. And does it also happen within the industry of where people, I mean, you spoke about self-medication, and you spoke about home mixes and things like that. And I'm sure that, you know, there must be people, you know, we also spoke about the costs and all of that. Do you think that the people that goes to, not Dr. Google, but Google in this case, you know, what is the dangers of trying to analyze yourself what to do, what to mix, and what to give the animals? What is the effect of that?
Adele, I think, yes, Google is there. It makes it much easier, you know, to get to an answer. But again, if you look at the, you know, like in Wikipedia as an example, Wikipedia, there's very, very good articles there, but many of those articles are not peer reviewed. Any person can place an article on Wikipedia, and then you go and read it, and because it's on Wikipedia, you know, Google said so. Google is sometimes not 100% correct, and then I think we need to make sure, you know, we've seen it now with COVID. You know, we've got so many virologists and epidemiologists and everybody that's on board now that can read. Actually, I've read it on Google, so I should not use this. I should rather use this. I think eventually, or not eventually, in the end, you've got a highly qualified person in the form of a medical doctor or a veterinarian. You know, we studied a long time and we don't know everything, but at least we know where to get the answers. So if you do have a new treatment, first contact your veterinarian and ask him, you know, what will be the effect. We don't know what's going to happen with the product. You know, I've seen it with dipping for ticks. You know, people will be using this sunflower oil and that sunflower oil. Fortunately, sunflower oil is now so expensive that people stop mixing their own dips and so on. But, you know, we can't just go out and say, I'm going to save some money. You're going to save 1 cent there. What's that saying? You know, cut your nose to spoil your face, or something like that. Rather, yes. Google is there, you know, to give us information, to give us some direction, but this is not the beginning and end of all. You need to have feedback and the information from a qualified veterinarian or medical doctor to tell you what's going to happen and what will be the effect if you use a certain product in a certain way. I just as an example, there was a safety for a product. You can use it in dairy cows. I've showed you the graphs there. Then the lady called me and said, listen, I've got antibiotics in your milk. I said, but what did you do? No, I put it intramammary. So they took the syringe, they injected, you know, in the teat canal. I said, but that's not developed as such. You know, it's developed if you put it intramuscularly at 1 milliliters per 50 kilogram, then you will not have high levels of this, and you can still use the milk.
Yes, yeah. I've got a technical question for you from Wendy, and she says that you have touched on this, but in your opinion, which tests is the best? Twin sensor, tri-sensor, or the Delvo test? And what is the difference between these tests?
Wendy, I can go back to my slide there and look at the different things, but at this stage, I think between twin sensor and tri-sensor, I would go for the tri-sensor because it's also the sulfurs is also included there. The twin sensor, according to my knowledge, is only for your beta-lactams and for your tetracyclines. The Delvo test, the same, you know, the Delvo test, the MRL is much higher for certain products. So, you know, it depends on what you want to test. I think the important thing is, you know, most of the products out there, if you look at the intramammary products, most of them will contain one form of a penicillin or a beta-lactam. So we need to test for the beta-lactams and we need to test for the tetracyclines, because the tetracyclines, you can, you know, like, I'm not going to mention names, but you can go into the co-op and buy the product over the counter there. Unfortunately, you know, there's sometimes a misuse of that. And then I think that's the reason why we need to test for that. So if she wants, my email is on the screen. I don't know if my screen is still on, but yeah, she can at any time send me drop me an email, and I can send her some more detail, you know, when you need to decide. Because there's a COPAN test and there's some other tests also, you know, that they, none of them, all of these tests are actually screening tests. As I said, you know, in that one slide, take a second sample and then go to a laboratory where they can actually analyze it with an HPLC and then tell you exactly what's the quantity of this antibiotic. So that the screening test will tell you it's between 2 and 5 micrograms, and it's positive because of that. But because of that, you can also get false positives.
Wonderful. Wendy, I hope that answers your question. And like Chris said, his email will be available afterwards. So you can definitely, if you would like to communicate further with him, you're welcome. It doesn't seem, Chris, like there's any other questions, but for me that I'm taking at heart is the great responsibility that everybody in the food chain has to ensure that every step that they take, to make sure that they understand, you know, what is the risks of if they would do something that falls without the, I mean, you've mentioned the laws and everything that's governing the people, but, you know, at the end of the day, to understand that that product is actually being made for people to utilize, and we need to all take the responsibility. And I think also what I took from it is that, you know, it all comes down to your food safety management system or your management system. It comes down to your relationship with your vet. And it also the guidelines that the Dairy Standard Agency has got available, you know, to make it easier for you, to help you and guide you. Chris, thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate the presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, as I've said, the recording will be available afterwards, and you can go to www.foodfocus.co.za to go and have a look and watch this recording. You can share this recording with other people, you know, with your buyers or with your farmers. And please let us know, should there be any other questions or any other topics that you would like the Dairy Standards Agency to look at, please make contact with us, and then we will make sure to provide you with information. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and have a blessed day until next time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.